I have noted that there is a new narrative out there, not with regard to Tesla necessarily, but with regard to all battery electric vehicles. And I've brought Brian on here today because I want Brian to help me understand the narrative, debunk the narrative. Maybe we agree, maybe we disagree, but whatever it's going to be, glad to have you back, Brian.
Always a pleasure. Usually a pleasure.
So we've been called a bunch of names over the last couple of days. The last couple of videos we've done, people are starting to compare us to elderly comedic teams, and Frickin' Frack wasn't among them. I was kind of surprised, but maybe our crowd isn't old enough to know who Frickin' Frack was.
Entirely possible.
All right, so like, subscribe, or whatever, do all that stuff. Follow Brian wherever he goes. My Tesla Weekend will get you almost anywhere. So Brian, the narrative started a few days ago. I think it started because the value of used BEVs dropped dramatically. Then
so I had seen that. Yeah, Go ahead.
Yeah,
I had seen that. Go ahead.
There was a bunch of headlines about that. And then there, of course, all used cars, the values dropped dramatically, but BEVs were pretty dramatic. Then there was another storyline that was coming out that there was a lot of BEVs in the way more days of inventory of BEVs, not counting Tesla, but counting all the other brands. There was lots of days of inventory sitting in lots. And then there was some more stories about maybe BEVs in used car lots. And then now the story became, the blush is off the rose with regard to the whole electronic revolution. And that's what I saw starting yesterday and today. And so that's what I brought you on to talk about. I want to talk about the massive failures of some of the BEVs that have come on the market, what that's about and how it might be corrected, and will it change, and maybe some of the few successes. Anyway, what do you think? What do you think about this narrative? And yeah.
Of course. So in regards to the claims of used EV prices plummeting, I haven't seen it. I saw comments on videos of mine mentioning it, saying and listing specific ones, and I looked and I didn't see it. If you go on cars.com and look up the R1T and look at there are quite a few for sale, but they're all very close to what you can order them for now, even though they've got 20,000 miles on it. That suggests to me, now we don't know how long they've been listed. We don't know what they're actually going to sell for, but that suggests the opposite. That suggests that the resale is holding up quite well. Then I looked at the e-Golf, which was a specific one mentioned by one of my commenters, and they said, the prices are, and I looked, there's not very many, maybe 200 of those for sale nationwide. I looked on, I don't remember if it was Cars or Auto Trader, and found that those are actually holding up pretty well too, about $20,000 for a car that only has 125 to 175 miles of range. So those have held up quite well. Now you can say Teslas are plummeting in the used car price, and that's because the new ones are so much cheaper. If you're eligible for any kind of federal or state incentive on a new vehicle, the used one needs to come in below that price. So in that regard, I haven't seen the softening of used car prices. And I think those are being held up because there are used car incentives. They're not as big as the new car incentives, but they're still quite good.
I think there's one more thing. Let me add one more thing.
Yes,
and
please.
The one more thing is that all used car prices were elevated last year because there was no new cars to buy. And so people were being forced into the market of used cars that didn't want a used car, but went after a used car because that was what was out there. And so that elevated the prices, and it's particularly elevated the prices of Teslas for quite a while there. So when you're looking at the apples to apples comparison year over year, there has been an overall decrease that was picked up by Trueflation and others. There's been an overall decrease in the overall value of used cars, about 8% overall. That counts gas as well as BEVs. But that would be the main explanation.
It sure would. That's actually a very good point. My brother-in-law, cousin-in-law, I don't know, one of my relatives by marriage bought a pickup truck at the height of lockdown. And as soon as he bought it, like a week later, the dealership called him up and said, "Hey man, do you want to sell it back for 8,000 over?" And he ended up on the news about it because it was a trend at the time. There just wasn't any inventory. The average of ICE manufacturers right now is about 54 days of inventory, which is a vast improvement, but still below historic norms, meaning new car prices can still be inflated. Not necessarily, but they're always trying, and some of them are getting away with it. And with high pressure sales, some people will take any price just to make the pain end. So now let's talk about the softening of new EV demand, because that's where I've noticed a much different trend. Yesterday, I did some digging on my own. I found there are 65 days of inventory for Mach-E listed for sale right now, or as of yesterday, just on autotrader.com. That doesn't necessarily capture every car that's available. And that's only in the US, whereas it's probably higher because those production figures are global, where this is just supply in the US. So it's probably quite a bit higher than 65 days of inventory. Compare that to their 54 days overall. And then the Lightning was even worse. It was well past 90 days, 95 or 6 is what I think I came up with. And again, that's comparing just US supply versus global demand. Mind you, the Lightning doesn't sell very many units outside the US where the Mach-E does. So these guys are starting to get a lot of inventory backed up. We've seen reports today or yesterday that ID3 and ID4 are backing up in Europe. And what this means is those factories are going to start slowing down. That means that the battery crunch is not as likely to affect those manufacturers, at least on existing models. That means that those manufacturers who were given a deal to buy a certain number of batteries are not going to be buying as many as they had said. That pushes Tesla back to further out in the number one position as the buyer of choice. We're going to give them the best deals. We're going to give them the first pick because we know they will actually complete their orders where the other guys won't.
In addition, I think, didn't Volkswagen say they're shutting down some factory capacity here for 5 weeks instead of the normal 3 in August?
So Tesla Fix and I addressed that the other day. We haven't seen anything that would indicate an unusual shutdown.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they're not slowing production. These companies said, we are going to buy X number of batteries. And if there's any kind of slowdown, it means those supply orders are not going to come in as high as expected. That annoys the heck out of these companies that have invested billions in building out their capacity for this customer. And now you're backing down. You told me you were all in this time. You were super serious about it. And now here we are. So that's good news for Tesla. It also means if their orders are softening, that prices you've got more room to negotiate. If everyone's running at capacity, you have no room to negotiate on parts pricing. If your orders are falling instead of rising, you lose negotiating power. So all of this paints to a very rosy picture for Tesla because they are still growing as quickly as they possibly can. And their growth projections have held steady for about 10 years now.
Yeah.
And that's you cannot you can't underestimate the value of that.
That's right.
Now on further on new prices, I would point out that if you look on AutoTrader, look for the Mach-E, look for the Ford Lightning, change your search to nationwide so you can see the actual inventory, and then sort by price, and you will find that there are a lot of dealers selling those vehicles below MSRP, and they're still not selling.
Still not. Yeah.
That's where the concern is. When people are, well, of course, they're piling up. These guys want 30, 40, 80,000 extra for it. Oh, yeah. Right. Of course, those are sitting, but you can pick one up today for 10% under MSRP and nobody doing it. That should be deeply concerning.
And that's why. Yeah. And I think the reason I wanted to have this meeting is because it's kind of turning out to be Not 100% across the board. We have a couple of standouts like Volvo and Porsche and maybe Mercedes. Apparently, they've had a pretty good year on their one vehicle at least. But even those are apparently not doing well in China. But let's concentrate on the United States for now. In the US, we basically have mostly failed product, sometimes apparently mechanically or inability to ramp, like the Hummer and the Ion, and what do we call the other General Motors, what is it called, the Cadillac
Lyric.
Yes, whatever it's called. Anyway,
Lyric.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Anyway, so what do you think is the main reason why we're seeing these really failed after failed products coming out of these folks?
They're not approaching it from first principles. First principle design means start with a clean sheet. Start with an objective, work backwards to find what the product is. And what these guys have been doing is starting with an existing product and electrifying it. And that leads you to inefficiencies. Toyota's got a new factory that's going to be building on a single platform, a gas car, a hybrid, a battery electric, and a fuel cell. That is no, that's not how that works. You can't do that. That's someone who's trying to be a doctor and a lawyer and a virtuoso musician and an Olympic athlete. You can't do all four at once.
Yeah.
If you try, you'll do none of them well. It's too many things. It's not going to work. It's not going to work.
So I had this theory a little while ago. See what you think of my theory. I have a theory that the ones that kind of looked good on paper, even though they weren't as good as a Tesla, but they were niched. So like the Mach-E, like the Lightning, they were niched. The Hummer, niched. Even the Cadillac, in a sense, would be niched. All of them failing either to be. We don't know if the Hummer and the Cadillac are failing because they can't make them or because there's no orders, or both. But do you think maybe it's really came down to not having the charging infrastructure and the word just got out? The salespeople might have even been talking about that because the salespeople in the Ford showrooms and the General Motors showrooms, not necessarily even 50% or 10% behind this BEV revolution. You think that the word got out, there's no place to charge these things. Why would you want one?
That's very possible. Other models, if you look at the US market share, Tesla dominates. Absolutely dominates. But if you look at Europe, Tesla, while being the leader, is not commanding a 70-80% of the market like it does in the US, because all of the charging is on an even playing field, because there's real competition, because all of the charging companies in Europe are actually trying to be charging companies rather than the biggest one in the US being Electrify America, which was a compliance, which was a regulatory requirement to continue selling cars for Volkswagen after Dieselgate. And there was no requirement that they work. There was a requirement that they build stalls, and build stalls they did. That's all they really did. Some of them even worked sometimes. So that definitely can play a factor. The other factor is in Europe, what you see a lot of is sales of lower range cars. Americans have been convinced that they cannot survive in a lower range vehicle. I still have people commenting, no, I need 700 miles of range, at least 500 for those 2 times a year instances when I do a road trip, and think that not taking a break is better than taking a break. Now in a Tesla, you can do a trip where you just bomb through because you've got autopilot, and it makes the driving experience so much less stressful. And with a lot of EVs, even Blue Cruise on the highway by Ford is very competent. It will give you a better experience.
Yeah.
But brakes are still helpful. Fine. In Europe, they don't have these notions. If you're going to be doing a trip of that length, you'll take a train or you'll fly. The road trip culture is very different. Yeah. So you will see a lot of shorter range Fiats and Hondas and different little city cars with, the Renault Zoe has like 130 miles of range. I don't recall, but it's unacceptably low by American standards. So those cars, and that brings with it a second feature, which is these cars can cost less to purchase.
Right.
So when we see that compact come, even if the range is only 250 miles, that car is going to be so cheap that once you start stacking the incentives on it, it's going to be almost free. If you're getting a $7,500 credit at the federal level, add another $5,000 for your state or local. There are places that go well beyond that. The San Joaquin Valley, Joe from the San Joaquin Tesla Owners Association had a tweet out that showed all the different incentives available for new and used. You could get about $15,000 off your sticker price. And then once you factor in your gas savings, it's a $5,000 car. That's what is missing from all the domestic manufacturers is affordability. They stopped making the Ford Focus. They stopped making anything under 25, 30 grand. The only options you have really under 25,000 now is a little bit of Honda, a little bit of Toyota, and a little bit of Kia. And that's kind of it. There's not much there. And that is what I think the market right now really wants, especially with the high interest rates and especially with the economic uncertainty on the horizon.
So you talked about first principles, and one of my other theories on this was that Elon Musk famously, and I probably quote this quote more than anything else, if you you must make a compelling product at a compelling price, or don't be in business. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a pretty simple statement. And I certainly, having been marketing products my entire adult life, actually not even my entire adult life, I was marketing products when I was in my single digits, selling greeting cards door to door. But anyway, it is true.
I've done that. I have done that when I was a kid.
You've done that too. So if it's not compelling, or if it's not the right price, and if those two things don't combine, so you can have a compelling product at a horrible price, or you can have a horrible product at a compelling price, and that's still not going to give you your best opportunity out there. Obviously, the Teslas are very compelling price. And again, I think the Mustang Mach-E is a good-looking car. And I know people think the Ford Lightning is a fine-looking little truck, and a big truck. Anyway, I'm not a truck guy. So
yeah. And they are compelling products, but the price is not there. Yeah. If you look at the entry-level cars from the 80s from Honda and Toyota, and then compare it to the entry-level from Ford, you had the Ford Escort and the Ford Fiesta, and you had the Honda Civic. Which one would you wouldn't pick the Escort or the Fiesta, you'd pick the Civic all day, and sales showed that. The only people buying the Escort were due to brand loyalty, because that was not a good car.
Right.
Hondas from the 80s are still on the road. Escorts and even the Taurus, no longer on the road. You just don't see them anymore because they were not well made. And the entry-level Ford Escort was, it was a piece of junk. It was really bad. And they just weren't interested in making a compelling car at the entry level. And the problem is, you need to if you want people to have brand loyalty, you have to get them into the brand. And sometimes the cheap car is the only way to do that. If you're not designing from first principles, you're not going to be able to build a car. You're going to struggle to do it in a way that's profitable. It doesn't matter how good the car is if no one's going to buy it. I've had people pushing back on my Lucid videos where they're saying, yes, but the engineering is the best. Well, that's up for debate. I can tell you ways in which it's not, but it doesn't matter if you have the best car in the world if you can't sell it at a profit. You're done.
And that would be true for Rivian too. I mean, Rivian is well into their ramp now, and they're still at negative cost of goods. So, or negative,
gross margin
profit per car. Yeah. So once again, we're looking at a good-looking car, maybe with some very fine engineering, but maybe it's not. To a certain extent, people don't buy engineering. Well, not to a certain extent. To a great extent, people don't buy engineering. They buy whatever their need is that needs to be filled at the time, and that commonly starts with looks It commonly starts with, in the case of electric vehicles, range, because people have this range anxiety, and I understand that. I've told you before what BAD stands for, right?
No.
Battery anxiety disorder.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
The
Whether it's our cell phones, whether it's our laptops, whatever it is, we've got battery anxiety disorder. And so when you're talking about getting stranded, we the closest we ever came to actually running out was in the worst desert in the United States.
Wow.
And
Wow.
we were so far from a charging station, but we made it.
Wow.
And that just goes to show again that if you can be in Death Valley and still make it out,
You're doing good. The thing with good engineering is there's two ways to approach it. One is to say, our good engineering means we came up with a novel sunroof, power
Right.
sunroof. But the second part of engineering is we found a way to make it reliable and cheap. Still every bit as good, better because it's reliable. And that's where engineering is failing. Lucid and Rivian is they've over-engineered the cars. There's redundancies in the structures that can be eliminated and will, but really there's so many features packed into every square inch that they can't possibly build it in a way that they could actually sell it. No one will pay $300,000 for these cars, and we know because they've tried. They're over-engineered at a time when money's going to get tight eventually. You will run out of other people's money to spend, and if you can't do it profitably. Lucid's numbers just came out. They only sold 1,404 cars last quarter, and this is not a surprise to anyone except, I guess, their shareholders who were screaming at me in the comments saying, well, they're shipping hundreds a week to Saudi Arabia. And I said, no, they're not, because the cars on the lot are not moving. Only a few hundred moved after the time we heard that announcement. So guess what, guys? Turns out that was also a hot load of horse pucky. So
all right, let's look at the other side of the equation, of course, and that
I'm
is
ready.
What in the world can Ford and Volkswagen? I'm going to talk about the ones that are not. I'm not even going to talk about the Japanese.
Sure.
Forget the Japanese. Let's
already done.
Let's talk about the ones in the United States who have facilities in the United States who get the $7,500 discount, or at least the $3,500 or the $3,750 discount, because they're made in the U.S. Even if it's a Chinese battery. The Volkswagens, the Hyundai Kia, etc., who
Sure. seem
to be sincere in their interest to build a BEV. What do they have to do? I think that this is. I'm going to, just before I let you loose, I think this is what compelled General Motors and Ford to make the decisions that they did 3 weeks ago in terms of reaching out to Tesla and saying, we got to have your system, because they were hearing back from customers and from dealers, nobody wants the cars because of range anxiety. I think they were hearing that a lot. And so I think that's what created that thing. So that will help, but it's going to be months, maybe even a year before the consuming public really gets it, that those cars can get charged at Tesla stations and that they can forget about range anxiety. It's going to take a lot of articles in the major places where people have been reading these negative articles about taking twice as long to get someplace because they couldn't find a charger that was working. So the chargers could help solve it. What else? What else do they need to do, and quickly? I don't mean quickly. I mean, what can they do that's quick?
The good news is that they're trying to. No. The good news is that they're already doing it. What they need to do is start with a clean slate design, and they're doing that. We already know that the development of the next Ford Lightning will be a dedicated EV platform. They're working on it now. Will they recognize some of the benefits of Cybertruck? Things like the gigacastings? Maybe. We know that that's a direction they wish to move. We know that that only works on high volume vehicles, which the Lightning is intended to be, should be. The F-150 line is a high volume vehicle. So will they do that? They will definitely have improvements over the current model. That will result in lower curb weight, better performance, all that stuff. Even if they're small changes, it'll still be a big improvement because they're starting with a clean slate. So that means they can improve their pricing a little, and a little bit lower price, a little bit better range. That might be enough to get it done. Chevy, GM, the Ultium line is a great idea. Make it as simple as possible so you can just make one platform that you can put 5 different cars on. Great, do it. We know they're good at rebadging. Rebadge, do it. So all of those are steps in the right direction. They're not getting distracted by silly things like hydrogen. They're not getting distracted by trying to put 3 different powertrains into a car. Those will all help. The mistake that they're making is not moving aggressively down market. You need to target something silly like 20,000. What would it take for us to make a car that we could sell at 20,000 with a profit? Is it 50 miles of range? Is that our starting point? Because then we can scale up to 25, 30,000 and still have a compelling car. And what I don't see them doing is showing the first inkling of willingness to go down market. The saving grace for Stellantis is that they've got a European design studio that already has EV works underway that they can hopefully just rebadge and sell as American cars.
Stellantis is the surprise to me.
Isn't it?
They're just like under the radar. They came up with a stupid name like Stellantis, and so nobody knows who they are or what they are. I guess Geely would be the other one that nobody knows. It's 2 stupid names, and they are 2 big surprises out there that appear to have some sense going into this revolution.
So Geely's got the huge advantage of Chinese manufacturing prowess and cost controls, with the benefit of legacy brands that they picked up on the cheap. So they're making, I don't remember which ones, but they've got a number of legacy brands under their belt.
Well, MG,
they can use.
MG okay. in England or in Europe is, that's what I think maybe the top selling non-Tesla brand in Europe right now.
I think Volkswagen still has the title, but MG of the Chinese brands, MG is coming in quick. Right. I've seen them in person at the Fully Charged show in May, and they're great cars. They look fine. The price is right. I asked Lars about it. Lars from Best in Tesla, friend of both our shows. Yes. And he was saying that these are popular. They're compelling. People like them. So, and whether people think Chinese when they think MG doesn't matter. MG's already on the brain. Right. Branding works. That's why people purchase brands like Craftsman, even if just to gut the quality and sell garbage thereafter.
As long as you mention Craftsman, see, that's going to bring me back to my kind of the first principles of the whole disruption idea. So Sears knew. No, they didn't know. Apparently they didn't know. Sears saw, they could see that there was an internet. Kmart could see there was an internet.
And they made the same mistake. They said, why would we want to compete in a low cost, low price, low margin arena when we've got this cash cow right here where we're making 30% on appliances? 30%, that's great money. Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, Home Depot's going to sell them at 8% markup. And you will, but do people really want to shop in a warehouse for $500 off? Yes. And then honestly,
and then online,
yeah,
completely miss that entire. Are we obviously have the iPhone versus the Palm Pilots and the whole thing. It's like every one of these disruptions. You look at these companies that are supposedly employing top CEOs that should have the vision, that should have the knowledge, that should be looking around themselves and going, what is going to be next? And what does this disruption mean? I mean, you're looking at Tesla today, and Tesla is, let's assume that you're okay, kind of in balance on a $50,000 car. You're kind of in the game. But you don't have full self-driving, you're not even working on it, and you don't have a $25,000, $20,000 vehicle planned, are you not going, let me see?
Yeah, what are you doing wrong, guys? The thing that car manufacturers are struggling with too is the double-edged sword of the dealership network. Dealers have been exceptionally greedy these last few years, to the point where it almost killed them. It almost drove them out of business. But now we're getting to the point where the manufacturers are starting to say, oh, wait, without high pressure sales tactics, these cars do not move. If you could just go on to Ford's website and order one and buy it and get it for that price, people would do that, right? Well, we just talked about there's ones available that are less than that price and people still aren't buying them. So what do you do when the high pressure sales is gone and your product is not sufficiently compelling to sell at any price? What do you do? The answer is, I don't know. Fail, I guess, and take your investors down with you, perhaps.
So the mission, of course, the Tesla mission, I mean, your and my mission might be to make as much money on the stock as possible. But Elon's mission is to usher in the age of electric vehicles and the age of electricity. And he's said all along, in order to do that, I need a bunch of help because I'm only going to make 20 million cars and we need about 80. And so we need somebody else to make these other 60 million cars. Now they could all be Chinese, and the Europeans are really worried.
They should be.
The Japanese should be really worried that it's going to be Tesla and China, and that's going to be pretty much it. But I see the Europeans talking about it, but what are they doing other than maybe having the cars made in China?
Right. And that's going to be a tough call. At least the Europeans are trying to remain in business in the affordable segment, but I think they know they have to in ways that the US manufacturers haven't quite wrapped their head around. So I would say, in summary, the claims of used cars being deeply, deeply discounted doesn't appear quite true. And I think those prices are bolstered by local and federal used car incentives. Right. The new car prices are falling because they have to. Sales are slowing for a lot of these legacy guys, and they should be worried when their EV inventory is twice as long as their gas inventory. That's excessive. And unless and until they get a first principle design that can actually reduce costs and produce a better product, they're going to struggle. And it's going to take, Ford has got a blue oval factory in Tennessee they're building. It's not going to be online for another year or two, but it's going to be online. And Ford has the cash reserves to float them until it does, to get their butt in gear and get in the game for real. That's my thinking. All
right. Well, hey, thank you so much, as always, for being part of the show. And people, as I always say, they should follow you everywhere. I'm not sure in total what that will mean for folks if they follow you everywhere, but in particular, your YouTube video, your YouTube show, My Tesla Weekend, online at your weird Twitter account is for something I can never even.
4K podcast.
4K podcast. There you go.
Yeah.
But is that, it's even spelled 4K. Is it 4K?
The number 4, the letter K, podcast.
Okay. All right. We got that. You see, that reinforces it for people. That's what I was doing. Yeah. Of course. And Randy, it's always a joy to be on the show, even on short notice. I happen to know a thing or two about a thing or two, and it can lead to some great conversations. And I appreciate the questions you ask. All right. Well, good then. See you again soon, I hope. And thank you all for watching. And it's been great talking to you. I have to say that at the end. It's very important that I say it's been great talking to you. Yes.
Click the link below to get your paperback, Kindle, or audiobook now.